and they'll have to, they do the,
Okay, so I guess you want me to start now at 7 o'clock?
I do. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so for those who are here, thank you for attending, and the presentation I'm going to have tonight will be somewhat eclectic, but there is a method to my madness here. What I'm going to be describing is travel plans that people had and where they went and what they saw and observed, and how these scripts that they were able to see in these migrations, how those scripts have been found in North America, and especially in the heartland, in what we call the Michigan Relics, or the Michigan artifacts that encompass a wide area within Michigan, including even up into Canada, in Illinois and Indiana. And these artifacts had certain scripts on them that, for most archaeologists of its day, thought that they were bogus and that they were fakes and so forth. So what I'm going to do is take you through these migration, the scripts that were found in these migrations, and how they relate to these tablets. And then eventually, I'll talk about how these ancient writings lend themselves to the Book of Mormon. So we'll start out with the first migration, and that's the route that Lehi's family took after they left Jerusalem and was told to leave it. And so I have a map here that you see in the annotated book edition of the Book of Mormon. And I have this little red dotted line that's following the Red Sea. And then you see that little turn to the east, where they take a easterly direction, and you'll see that script on an altar. And so in the Book of Mormon, they refer to it as that it was a place called Nahum. Now, they didn't name it like they did the River of Laman or the Valley of Lemuel. They actually saw a script, and the script is actually a form of a Semitic script called a Sabian Script, and it's based on the same idea of a Semitic script, and meaning that you read it from right to left and there are no vowels in it. And so that inscription was on an altar at a place where there is a burial site. So the word Nahum is repeatedly found in the Bible, and it relates to sorrow, hunger, consoling, mourning, and so forth. So what happened was, in 1997, there was this German team that did some explorations in this area, and they came across these altars, and these altars had this inscription on it. Eventually, they came to another group of researchers from France. They came in and they found another altar that had the same inscription on it. And this inscription was in the Sabian Script, and it refers to Nimhite family, and that it is a place where they had burial. So at least we have a form of a Semitic script found by a Lehite colony in southern part of Arabia, and that script they could read. That family could read what was on that altar, and that's where they buried Ishmael, at a place called Nahum, which is a place of mourning. So now we fast forward to the year 2009. And then 10 years later, 2019. What happened was, this man at the bottom of your screen on the lower right, name is Captain Philip Beale. He's a naval commander in England, and he always had a desire to recreate what he believed that the Phoenicians, in their writings, in their history, they circumnavigated Africa in a sailing ship, a single sail sailing ship with a crew of about 20 people in it. And he went about getting the funding and getting a crew that they could build using 600 BC technology, that kind of a sailing ship. And they did it in Beirut, Lebanon. Once they got the ship built, it took them about 8 months. they sailed down the Red Sea and then went over to a place in Oman called Salalah. They waited for the wind currents and the flow of the ocean to take them using the sail to go down the coast, the eastern coast of Africa. Now, when they left at the end of October. Now, in the Book of Mormon, we read that there was a lot of figs and honey, and they brought provisions with them. And it turns out that that's about the time we believe that the Lehite colony left as well, because they had the time to gather the provisions to take them on the ship. So what's really interesting is that ship, the Phoenicia, they call it the Phoenicia. They sailed off on October the 26th, and then they ended up in a little town, a little area called Comoro. Now this place called Comoro is a tiny little island, and it is made up of several little islands, but the main island, believe it or not, has a city. The capital city is called Moroni. But what's interesting is that if you looked up the word Cumorah and you looked up this Comoro and you find it on Wiki, according to mythology, the spirit dropped a jewel, formed a great circular inferno, and this became this Katha La volcano, which is the island of Grand Comoro. And King Solomon is said to have visited this island. So this goes back to biblical times. And again, the Wikipedia article says that this name is an ancient name. Now, again, that name is based on a Semitic script in the sense that you fill in the vowels. The actual name of that place was CMR. And so if you use the O and you put it in that context, you got Comoro. And of course, in the Book of Mormon, we have the name Cumorah. Now, Cumorah, you see a lot of the ahs, like Moroni and Mosiah. So the ah sound is definitely a Hebrew sound. The ending of a lot of Hebrew words and names ending in the ah sound. So now we have some connection of an actual event that happened in our lifetime that had a Phoenician style ship that was 1600 BC technology ending up on an island called Cumorah that potentially has what we call a Book of Mormon name that we can read that has a derivation on a known place. Now, the second expedition that occurred was after they had done that one, they said, we need to get more funding so that we could see if we could get the second way that we believe the Phoenicians traveled, and that is through the Mediterranean, and that they are able to go through to the Atlantic Ocean and find America. Now, the first one, by the way, when they went through that trip, I go back to this video, this slide here. That first trip I have in yellow line. When they got down to the Cape of Cape Town, they had some problems with the weather and they were delayed for a couple of days, but then the winds took them very quickly toward North America. But they didn't want to go to North America. They wanted to circumnavigate Africa. That was the goal of the whole expedition, is to prove that the Phoenicians could circumnavigate Africa, and they can do it with a single sail. So they did. They fought the winds, and they ended up eventually working their way back to Beirut, and you can see that route. Now, the second time they did the route, they wanted to actually go to America, because in a lot of the research that people have done with archaeology, they have found a lot of Phoenician scripts in North America. So they wanted to see if they could do that. So that was the second trip. Now, you can see that the Phoenicians had a lot of ports along the Mediterranean, and what's in yellow here are their ports that they had. Notice where Egypt is, and up here, if I have my cursor here, you can see Egypt down here, and up in this region is where the actual Phoenicia people lived. Up in Tyre and Sidon is where the Phoenicians lived, but they controlled the Mediterranean Sea through their shipping and their commerce, So they had access to all of these areas in North Africa. Now, when the Phoenician wanted to do their second trip, Philip Beale made this statement. He says, anyone could have done this trip toward, through the Atlantic before Columbus, it would have been the Phoenicians. So that's why he wanted to prove that they could have done it. So they went ahead and left from Carthage, Tunisia. They went through the Strait of Hormuz there, and then they went to a place called Essaouira, and then in Morocco. And then finally, they did their final stop in an island in the Canary Islands called Tenerife. Now, Tenerife is a tiny little island. And in that island, there were a lot of stone artifacts or stone edifices that had a type of Phoenician script written on them, as well as that's in a horizontal script. But then there was this one that was in a vertical script. So that particular image where you see this line in a circle and looks like a kind of like a V and a line and a square U and two vertical lines, that particular script, they didn't know what that meant, but there was a person in Ontario, Canada, Michel Botios, who is an expert on these kinds of scripts. So when he saw this script, he came back with says, well, I know that this is what they call an ancient Berber vertical script. And based on the alphabet that he had, he knew that those pictographs that you see, those little lines and so forth, and certain consonants that we have in our alphabet. And so, as you see here, he sees that first horizontal line as being the letter Z, and then there are no vowels in this script. Again, it's like another Semitic script. There's no vowels. The next one is an R, that circle. The next one's an H. The one next to that could be an M, he said, and the other one could be either an L or a W. And in his opinion, he felt that it meant Zarahemla, but he didn't know what that meant. He says, all I know is that it appears to have the name Zarahemla to it, but I don't know what that means. And then we said, well, that turns out to be a name in the Book of Mormon. And he had never read the Book of Mormon to know that. But here's an independent individual that looked at that script and came up with this word called Zarahemla. So now we have this particular second expedition, 10 years later after the first, validating what we think is a potential travel route that Mulek took. Now, in Omni, we read, behold, I am a Malachite, the son of Abinadab. Behold, I will speak unto you somewhat concerning Messiah, who was made king over the land of Zarahemla. So that we get the name Zarahemla in Omni for the first time. And then down here, going on in that, verses 17 through 18, finally, their language is corrupted. They brought no records with them. They denied the being of their creator. And Messiah, nor the people of Messiah could understand them. But it came to pass that Messiah caused that they should be taught his language. And it came to pass that after they were taught the language of Messiah, Zarahemla gave a genealogy of his fathers, according to his memory. So the person's name that they met was Zarahemla, and it was in the land of Zarahemla. Now, we don't know if that was a name that had been passed down from generation to generation to generation, like the name Nephi. But it is interesting that that name Zarahemla showed up on that island of Tenerife. So now, again, we look at this Phoenician boat. They sailed easily, and this is Philip Beale speaking again. He says the Phoenician boat sailed easily from Tyre and Sidon, two leading Phoenician cities that produce murex purple dye. Evidently, that dye came from these mollusks that came off of that Canary Island area, and they would go over there and get that and then grind that into a dye. And so both now in modern Lebanon and Gibraltar and Tangier, that 2,000 odd mile voyage is about the same distance as across the Atlantic. So again, Captain Philip Beale was trying to establish that what I'm trying to accomplish here is that I'm going to take this ship, that's a Phoenician ship that was built around 600 BC, and sail to America using a single sail. By the way, on that ship was the publisher of my book, Boyd Tuttle. He's with Digital Legends Press, and he wanted to be on a crew, and he was accepted on that crew, and he was able to have a great experience. I think he's going to write a book on that. I think that's in the works. So now we read in Alma, it says, and it came to pass that the Amalekites came upon the hill Omnihu, which was east of the river Sidon, which ran by the land of Zarahemla. So now we've got these two words, Sidon and the land of Zarahemla, associated with Philip Beale. So what is Philip Beale associated with? The Phoenician ship. And where are the Phoenicians? They're from Sidon. And now we've got the name of the river called Sidon, and we got a place name called Zarahemla. Now, if you look at the history of the Mississippi River, what is the Mississippi River from the point of view of the Native Americans? The Lenape, which is the Delaware people or nation, they describe their history, and they talk about them coming eastward. They were out in the west, they move eastward, and then they get up to this river. And they found that it was named the Namasi Sipu, which means Mississippi. That's where we get the name Mississippi. It's an Indian name. And what does that name mean? It means the river of fish. And in Hebrew, if you look up the word Sidon, it means it's a fishing port. And so the Mississippi River is the river of fish. And so it's interesting that we have these connotations as well. So here on the map, I have up here and up on the upper right, where the Sidon would be, in Tyre and Sidon. You hear about that in Lebanon, and that is where the Phoenicians lived, north of Israel. So we get in Helaman, and now will you dispute that Jerusalem was destroyed? Will you say that the sons of Zedekiah were not slain, all except for Mulek? Yea, you do not behold that the seed of Mulek, they've been driven out of the land of Zarahemla, the land of Jerusalem. So what did Hugh Nibley say about this? He says, well, nowhere are we told that Mulek was the leader of the company. And indeed, at his age, that would be unthinkable. His father, Zedekiah, who reigned from 597 to 586, was only about 31 when he was taken prisoner and blinded. But as the sole survivor of the royal family and heir presumptive to the throne, he was certainly the most important person in the company, a source of legitimate pride to the group. The name tells you everything. Mulek is not found anywhere in the Bible, but any student of a Semitic language would instantly recognize it as the best known form of diminutive or characterative, a term of affection and endearment, meaning little king. What could they call the uncrowned child, last of his line, but the little king? What could they call themselves but Mulekiah or the Mulekites? So what's interesting is this. The premise that I have is that if Mulek's small party, it was escaping Jerusalem because they're seeing the destruction, the queen, Zedekiah's wife, probably is with child or just gave birth to their son, and she's escaping with her entourage. And they took a passage on a Phoenician ship. They could have taken it up, they could have gone north up to that area, or they could have gone down to Egypt, and they were, as you saw, they had ports in that area. And so if that was the case, they became a passenger on, if they were, that group became the smaller party on a larger group of Phoenicians that were going westward on their trip. So that became the dominant language of that group. It wasn't the Hebrew language, it was the Phoenician language. So at the time as I discovered them, those that were from Mulek's party had become exceedingly numerous. Nevertheless, they had had many wars and serious contentions and had fallen by the sword from time to time, and that is Mulek's ancestors' language had become corrupted, and they had brought no records with them, and they denied the being of their creator, and Messiah nor the people could understand them. Now, it would make sense to me that if that's the case, that they were passengers on this ship, that they would not be the dominant language. Although it be similar to us learning Spanish or understanding French, they still have a Latin root to it. and it would take us a while to learn that language. And I think this might be a possibility of what was going on when Mosiah met up with the people of Zarahemla, that it took them a little while, but they were able to get their language back in gear, and they were able to communicate with them. And it's important because the Phoenician language derives from a Semitic root. And if I look up the word Zarahemla, it means seed of compassion or merciful scion. And a scion would be an heir apparent. And so they were merciful, if you want to call it, to Mulek and the plight that he had, or that child, or the queen and her child, who they named Mulek. And so that term Zarahemla might have been given to them, or maybe there was a man on that ship that they named Zarahemla because he was the one that became merciful to them and had compassion on them. But I find these, this is a stretch, but it gives you some idea of what these words mean and how this word could have derived itself into the Book of Mormon narrative. I want to go back one more time here to this trip. Notice that when they went on the second trip, they went through basically the same route that Columbus took, because they ended up in the Bahama Islands, the Dominican Republic rather, and then they eventually worked their way to Florida. Easily they could have made their way into the Gulf, because a lot of hurricanes take you into the Gulf. If you look at the routes of hurricanes, they either go on the East Coast or into the Gulf Coast. And if they went to the Gulf Coast, and the way the rotation of the earth is such and the way the winds go, they could have easily traveled up the Mississippi River and got to the Des Moines, Iowa rapids, and that's where they disembarked. They couldn't go any further because the rapids in the river at that time, it stopped there for the ship to go any further. So that's just, again, a possibility. It doesn't prove anything, but it gives you a real sense that this event happened. This Phoenician ship did take this voyage. And this is a possibility of understanding how that Mulek group got there to North America. So now we're going to get into these Michigan relics, because in this area where that ship could have ended up, we find a lot of these artifacts. So as the United States was being developed, and it was people moving westward, and they were farmers getting their cheap land and cultivating the land. In the Midwest especially, there's not much timber there. And so they would clear, they break up the sod, break up the prairies and stuff. And while they were doing that, they were finding all these kind of interesting, weird artifacts. And so here's an example of one. And here's what we call a Michigan Slate relic. This is out of Slate. The place where the slate was found is in the Michigan area. There's a quarry up there that just, you could get tons and tons of the slate. And so this is what it would look like. And this slate here, by the way, is about, I'd say about 8 inches long and about 6 inches wide. And look at the detail of what's on this. And you look at some of the images, they look interesting. And then you've got a script, and you see a combination of different things on that script. So immediately when the researchers and anthropologists and archaeologists looked at this, they thought that this was just a mishmash of stuff, and they immediately said this is all fake. But here I've got a quote from William Paley, who was an English clergyman and philosopher, and from 1743 to 1805. He says, "There is a principle which is the bar against all information, which is a proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep men in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt before investigation." That is such a powerful statement, because most people that were from the academic community had contempt for these artifacts. They immediately said these had to be forgeries, because these kinds of writings did not exist in America. The savages that they saw, the Native Americans, they felt were savages. They didn't have any written records. They were incapable of anything like this. That's why we're forcing them from their native lands and we're putting them into reservations. So the whole narrative at that time, these things were being discovered, and these things were being discovered in the early 1800s, all the way up into the late 1800s, and in fact, even into the early 1900s. And they found literally thousands of these things all over the place. So now let's take a look at a person who did not just scoff at it. This person, Harriet Mertz, has a huge undertaking that was given to her. She was asked to look at these artifacts and do an assessment. Why? Because of her pedigree and her history. She's a graduate of the Chicago's Marshall Law School. She's a renowned courtroom expert in handwriting analysis. She worked in the US and Canadian patent offices. She was a lieutenant commander in the US Navy and worked during World War II. She was a code breaker for the US cryptography department. And it took her 32 years of research to write the book that you see here called The Mystic Symbol, Mark of the Mound Builders. And she looked at over 3,000 artifacts. And then she published, this book was published after her death by her son in 1986. But as you read the book, her conclusion is these cannot be fakes. And then she gives an exhaustive examination as if she's in a court of law that she was in many times, proving forgery. She says, I have all the evidence to tell you that these could never have been forged. And she goes into exquisite detail, explaining so much of the history and what she observes. So if you look at just a smattering of these artifacts, the question is, are there any evidences of any Phoenician scripts found in these relics? Now, I've circled something that is part of the her book. It's called The Mystic Symbol, and virtually all the artifacts had this symbol on it. There's 5 nails. You've got the 3 that are totally vertical, one that's slanted to the right, and then another nail that's going between the 2 in the center. We'll get the next slide to explain what that means. But if you look at the scripts here, it's a mishmash of different things, but definitely there is Phoenician scripts in these artifacts, in these relics. In fact, they had a TV program on Magellan TV, and one of the persons who was in our group that attended our meeting out there in Iowa, when we went to the temple site and the Davenport Museum, was an individual that was in this video, that was in this documentary, and Dr. Richard Stamps. But anyways, this whole documentary goes into the history of how these artifacts were found and the controversy behind them, and the ultimate lesson that they give you, or the conclusion they give you on this TV presentation, is that, I'll read it here, the inscriptions are largely a horrible mixture of the Phoenician, Egyptian, and ancient Greek characters taken at random from a comparative table of alphabets such as found at the back of Webster's dictionary. Now, what's interesting, that is something that happened in just recently, in the last 10 or 15 years, this video. And that's a statement from that video. What's interesting is Harriet Mertz in her book says, I have scoured and looked to find any Webster's dictionary at that date, back in the 1800s, and none of the Webster's dictionary had anything to do with Phoenician, Egyptian, or Greek characters. And so this statement is patently false. There were no Webster's dictionaries that had any of this script on it. So these people already had a preconceived idea that all they had to do was go to a dictionary and get it. But did they ever go to a dictionary and find them? No, they never did. And as a result, they washed their hands up and say, these things are fake. So now here's another example of a copper. Now, the ones I just showed you are slate, but this one's from copper. And then we had David Linsley. Now, David Linsley is an artist. He's the one that does the great artwork with Moroni, Captain Moroni, the title Liberty. He did a wonderful piece with Abraham Lincoln. But as an artist, he did the best he could to replicate what he thinks was the way the script looked. And this is from Etzenhauer, who was a Mormon living in as a missionary during that time in that Michigan area, and being told, no, he was in Indiana, where Notre Dame is, the university, and there was some professor there that knew about these things and thought that this LDS missionary would have an interest in it. Anyway, so Etzenhauer did have an interest, so he took a lot. He found and kept these in his possession. And so this is the 10 Commandments. And so we have, again, you can see what the script looks like. It's called a feathering, if you want to call it. It looks like a feathering look to it, but it definitely has a Phoenician look to it. And again, these symbols, this mystic symbols being found throughout. Now, this mystic symbol was a mystery for a long time. Now, Wayne May, who is the editor of Ancient American Magazine, he lives in Wisconsin. His magazine's been around for many, many years, and his whole interest is finding pre-Columbian artifacts and history of what happened before Columbus came here, and who were the people, and what were their stories and customs and any kind of things that were from the ground, and that kind of thing. So he was presenting somewhere in Golden Valley, Minnesota, and a person from the Ojibwa tribe was in his presentation. And when he saw that symbol, he knew exactly what it was. And Wayne afterwards says, tell me what it meant. He says, well, that's the name of our God. And what do you mean it's the name of your God? He says, it's the name of Jehovah. It's Vahe Yodeva. And he says, that's the way we wrote it, with these nails. Now, if you go back and look at what the Hebrew letters look like, the letter Va is in the shape of a nail. And so we know that some of the scripts had been changing over the years. And again, this is a fairly modern script of what we call the Hebrew script, but the Va was in the shape of a nail. And so if you look at those symbols, it's you read it from, again, right to left. There's no vowels in Hebrew. It's Yod, He, Va. And so that is what that script translates to. And virtually all of the Michigan Relics has that symbol on it. Now, as LDS members, we know that there are more than just a nail in the palm of the hand and a nail in the feet. There's other nails. And so this potentially could be the symbol of the 5 nails that went through Jehovah. Now we're going to get into something that is of great interest, and that is how these scripts might relate to what we see in the characters that we get with the Anthem Transcript. So this comes from the Joseph Smith's papers. You can see it. It's called Appendix 2, Document 1. Characters copied by John Whitmer around somewhere between 1829 and 1831. That year is important. It helps us identify what kind of writing this is going to be and when John Whitmer comes into the scene. So John Whitmer is the son of Mary Whitmer. Why is that important? Well, because Mary Whitmer was the first to be shown the small plates of Nephi. I'll explain why it was the small plates of Nephi, not just the plates of Mormon. Now, what's in the stone box that Joseph Smith got when he went to the hill Cumorah and he saw the record for the first time, was given a chance to actually take it home with him, that's the Plates of Mormon, and it's an abridgment taken from the large plates of Nephi. There are no small plates of Nephi in that stone box. It's only an abridged record, and Mormon does the abridgment. And in the title page of that book, it says this is an abridgment taken from the plates of Nephi on Mormon's own plates called the Plates of Mormon. So why is it that Mary is being shown these small plates? Well, we get this record from her son, David, who is a witness. He's one of the 3 witnesses now. And he says, soon after our arrival home in Fayette, New York. Now, why is he saying that? He is a friend of Oliver Cowdery. Oliver and Joseph had just completed the Plates of Mormon. Remember now, Martin Harris was the one that did the early translation. And he had they got through 116 pages of full scrap paper, and he wanted to take it home to show his wife and a few others. That was lost. Martin Harris was the first scribe, and he was scribing from the Plates of Mormon. It was the Book of Lehite. Now, when Martin lost that ability to further translate, Joseph went to Harmony to be near his wife's family area. He got a home down there in Harmony, and he waited until he was given the privilege to get the plates back and to get the Urim and Thummim back. And then he waited for a scribe, and it was Oliver Cowdery that became a scribe. So when he had always with him the Plates of Mormon, and it's the abridged record, and they pick up, and we start reading in Mosiah is where Oliver Cowdery comes into the scene. When they finish the Plates of Mormon, they want to go back and retranslate the Book of Lehite, but we get 2 sections in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 9 and section 10. Section 9 says to Oliver, other records I have that you can translate. And those other records are going to be these plates, these small plates. And in section 10, it says, don't go back and retranslate the Plates of Mormon. You're going to translate the plates of Nephi. And those are the plates, these small plates. So Oliver then requests to have David Whitmer come, who lives with his family up in a farm in Fayette, New York, to come down with a wagon to collect them and take them back to their home up in Fayette. So now David Whitmer is saying, soon after arrival home in Fayette, New York, I saw something which led me to the belief that the plates were placed or concealed in my father's barn. What plates? These are going to be the small plates. I frankly asked Joseph if my supposition was right, and he told me it was. Sometime after this, my mother was going to milk the cows when she was met out near the yard by the same old man, judging by the description of him. Now, what does that mean? He said, the same old man. When he got Joseph and Oliver down in Harmony, he took them up to Fayette, New York. But on the way up there, an old man with a knapsack on his back that ruffled. David Whitmer said it sounded like there was a metal, something metal in his knapsack. The old man, you want to ride up to Fayette? He said, no, I'm not going to Fayette. I'm going to Comoro. And that's the first time that David Whitman heard the word Comoro. He didn't know what that meant. And what that old man was doing was taking the Plates of Mormon back to the hill Comoro. Anyway, so that's the mother. And so now this is the same old man, judging from the description. Now his description of that old man was he's about 5'8", weighed about 200 pounds, and had a white beard. That has nothing to do with the description of Moroni, who said to her, you have been very faithful and diligent in your labors. This is the old man, which is, we think, is Nephi, one of the 3 Nephites. You have been very faithful and diligent in your labors, but you are tired because of the increase in your toil. It is proper, therefore, that you should receive a witness that your faith may be strengthened. Thereupon he, Nephi, showed her the plates. That's David Whitmer. So now what's interesting is that the small plates of Nephi were handled and hefted, providing physical proof that they were real. Now the Plates of Mormon, which was in the stone box, those 3 witnesses never handled those plates. They never were able to lift them or to go through the leaves of them. They had a spiritual witness, and the commandment was that Joseph was given was to show them to no one. And yet here we have the small plates. We have Mary looking at them, and then we have the 8 witnesses saying, we saw the many leaves, we handled it with our hands, we saw the engravings, and we've seen it hefted. So evidently these other sets of plates that is referred to in D&C section 9 are these small plates in Nephi. Now, how can we show that this is correct? Well, again, if we look at the history here, we've got Martin Harris, he's got the Book of Lehite, that's in the Plates of Mormon. They're lost. Oliver Cowdery now scribing for the Plates of Mormon. They want to go back and retranslate. Nope, you're not going to do that. There's going to be other records. So these are the records that are being found in Fayette, New York. And it turns out that John Whitmer is one of the scribes for a few of the verses in the first chapters of First Nephi. And the characters that we see may be from First Nephi. So let's take a look at what we're going to see on these characters. Now, when we read in First Nephi chapter 1, verse 2, Nephi says, I make a record in the language of my father, which consists of the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians. What was the language of the Egyptians in 600 BC? It was Demotic Egyptian. And there I have to the left here from Wikipedia what a script would look like, a Demotic. And the time period is from 650 BC up to the 5th century AD. And so that's Demotic Egyptian. Now, that is in the small plates because Nephi, having been born in goodly parents, is the small plates. And that was written about 40 years after they had left Jerusalem. And he has learned, it's the language of the Egyptians, which at that time was Demotic Egyptian. However, Mormon is now abridging 1,000 years of history. They're taking from the large plates in Nephi, which is a history of the contentions of his people. And during those 1,000 years, when Mormon is abridging and writing his own Plates of Mormon, it now results in a reformed Egyptian. And he reread that in Mormon 9:32. And now behold, we have written this record according to our knowledge in the characters which are called among us, the reformed Egyptian, being handed down and altered by us according to our manner of speech. And that can be the same true of English. What we're speaking of English today is going to be different than the English of 1600. It's a different form. It's been altered. Same thing with German to some degree, but definitely English has gone through lots of changes since 1600. In fact, in our own lifetime has changed. You know, when I was growing up in the 50s, compared to what we say things today is completely different. So there's the difference. We have Demotic Egyptian, we believe, is in the small plates, and the large plates were the Reformed Egyptian. So now, in 1942, in the Improvement era, Ariel Crowley took a look at some Egyptian writings that had been shown to be authentic. And he meticulously went through and looked at different characters on this Egyptian work, which was known to be Demotic Egyptian. And then he starts comparing them to the different images that were on the Anthem Transcript. And he created these several pages. This is just an overview of the pages. This is a blow up of a couple of the pages. Off to the left is the characters that come off of the Anthem Transcript, and to the right is what he found in this Demotic Egyptian work. And you can see that there's strong similarities between the two. So now the question is, that Demotic Egyptian or Reformed Egyptian that occurs over the centuries might be what we see in the Micmac writing. So when we see the Micmac Reformed Egyptian writing script, it closely resembles the characters copied to John Whitmer. So this is the Lord's Prayer written by in the script of the Micmacs. Now the Micmacs is a group of Native Americans up in the northern part, northeastern Canada, in Nova Scotia and Ontario, Quebec, and so forth. And this particular type of writing, and you notice at the very bottom of the center here, I have this panel, and at the very end, you'll see the word Amen. And those two little lines up there are similar to those lines that you see here in the Micmac and the Nephite writing. And of course, in the Book of Mormon, we'll see the word Amen as well. So again, this is I'm just showing you some correlations. I'm not proving anything. I'm just giving you an example that these scripts that look weird to us there's a pedigree to them, and there's a reason why they're there. So now we're going to take a look at how we can determine how the Book of Mormon is in First Nephi, and it's from the small plates. And we do it because John Whitmer is the one that did the script. It's in the Joseph Smith papers. It says it's in the handwriting of John Whitmer. So what is the handwriting of John Whitmer? Well, here is section 107. This is in the Joseph Smith paper. And this is the description. It says this top 3 lines that you see up here is in the handwriting of John Whitmer. And then there'll be a break. And then now Oliver Cowdery takes over, and it's in his handwriting. So just by looking at the letter D at the end of a letter like laid or according, where you get the D in the middle there, notice that John Whitmer's D is an open-faced D with a flourish tail going to the left, whereas Oliver Cowdery's letter D is a closed-faced D with the tail going down. It's not a flourish at the top. So just that alone, just that one letter can show you that we have 2 different handwriting styles here. So now we go back to the original manuscript. Now there's 2 kinds of manuscripts. There's the original manuscript that was in the handwriting of here in both handwriting of Oliver Cowdery and John Whitmer. And where are they? They are in Fayette, New York. And what are they coming from? They're coming in the First Nephi. So this is the small plates. It's in New York. It's not down in Harmony, Pennsylvania. They're in Fayette, New York. These are the small plates. These are the plates that Mary got to handle and see. These are the plates that the 8 witnesses were able to look through the leaves and be able to handle and heft them. So this was not something they could not see. This was something they could see. And so now John Whitmer is one that's seeing these plates. There's no commandment not to show these plates. In fact, if anything, they're seeing these plates. So now I have in the original manuscript a handwriting of 2 people. The yellow line is in Oliver Cowdery. They have the D's with the tails, the closed-faced D with the tail. And in the underlined red, I have the D with open-faced D with the flourish to the left. And you can see that it's coming in pretty strongly that there are 2 different handwriting styles here. And it's in First Nephi chapter 2, verses 2 through 9. So again, we can look at it, we can bring it up. You can see where the letters D is open-faced with a flourish. And the word of the Lord, he did as the Lord. That's First Nephi chapter 2, 3. Now Oliver Cowdery comes in. The letters the D is closed with the tail at the bottom. And then again, we're still in First Nephi chapter 2. So evidently, Oliver Cowdery had some issues and he needed a break, or he had to do something, maybe restroom break, who knows, maybe a coffee break, who knows what happened. But he had to take a break, and so John Whitmer filled in, and that's why we see this. Now, there are 2 types of manuscripts. There's original, and then there's the printer manuscript. This is the original manuscript. This is the one that was used for Oliver Cowdery to create the printer's manuscript that went to the publisher so that they can print the Book of Mormon. This was the one that was found in the Nauvoo mansion. The reorganized church had this in their possession for many years. And recently our church was able to acquire enough money to buy this and then spend the money to get it restored. And only about 27% of the original manuscript is available to us to look at. And this is portion of it. And it happens to be in First Nephi. So now what is this Anthem Transcript? What is it like? Well, the Anthem Transcript is not what we're seeing with the John Whitmer handwriting. It has nothing to do with the Anthon at all. Why am I saying that? It's because in 1841, Chattel's Anthon remembered that the characters were arranged in columns like the Chinese mode of writing, and presented the most singular medley I'd ever beheld: Greek, Hebrew, and all sorts of letters. Again, he was just bezazzled by the fact that these characters looked weird, to him. They had some Semitic style to them. But remember, back then, Egyptology was not even people didn't even know anything about Egyptology, Demotic. There were no professors of Egyptology at all. So anyways, he looked at it and he just did the best he could, saying, it looks to me like there's a mixture of things. And they were distorted, they were unskilled, so forth and so on. In the final account that he leaves in 1840 says, they contain one or two parallel columns, rude imitations of Hebrew and Greek characters, together with various delineations of sun, moon, and stars. By the way, the sun, moon, and stars had to do with Moroni sealing the plates. And so that's in the beginning of the plate. He seals it in the beginning. So that'll be part of the beginning of the plate. It will be in the first part of the Nephi. And the plates of Nephi will be where the seal is. So that's really what we're seeing here. But anyways, that's another subject. So now if we go back and look at this character map, they're not in columns, and they are in rows. And also one more thing that you can see here is that when Martin Harris describes what he did when he went up there, this is from Joseph Smith History, verse 64, he says, I went to the city of New York and presented the characters which had been translated with the translation thereof to Professor Anthon. And he stated the translation was correct, more so than he'd ever seen before, and that they were from Egyptian. And then I showed him those that were not translated. He said they were Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyric, and Arabic, which again would be like that Sabian script. But again, you look at this, where is the translation? There isn't any translation with this. They're not in columns, they're in rows. And if you look at it carefully, you'll see from the right to the left, John Whitmer is looking at a plate, he's looking at the characters, and notice that his hand, he's right-handed because they're sloping upwards. The next line, it slopes upwards. The next line, third line down, you keep on going, then it slopes upwards. So obviously he's looking at the characters and doing the best he can to create them on the page. So now if we look at what that Crowley did, he looks at these H's, he groups them all together, and these are on that character map. And there's this looks like an H, a flourished H, a very fancy looking H. Well, in the Demotic, there's a thing that looks similar to it, and it means first person. It's the person who is the scribe who's writing the record. And in this case, it may be I Nephi. And of course, what is the first plate? What is the small plates of Nephi? It's a first person account. In the large plates, it's not a first person account. It's an abridgment of an ancient record of history. Whereas I Nephi, I Jacob, I Omni, these are first person accounts. So we're going to see this script over and over again because it's a first person account like we see in first Nephi. So now this line here that you see here is the first line in first Nephi chapter 2 verse 34. And this is being these characters, the Demotic Egyptian characters, and it came to pass, must mean speak, Nephi spoke, the Lord speaking with the Lord, and I returned to the tent of my father. So these particular images or these symbols that you see here are from a table of known Demotic characters with suggested interpretations. And so Brian Nettles, who was in our group that went out to Iowa, took a look at, after I had made my presentation saying, here's where you need to be looking at how to interpret this script. He then went back to that first Nephi and looked at chapter 2, and he found a correlation of these images to the language that's so whoever's got their phone on or their thing on, you need to mute it. Look on the lower left and see the mute. So again, you see the script here. So all of these scripts here show that they can be interpreted from that first Nephi. So again, I don't want to go into all the detail here, but Brian Nettles is still working on this. And so far he's been able to translate, I think 5 or no, I know he's translated 5. I think he's going into more. I think he's up to 7 now. And all of these images that you see here, he's been able to translate based on that map of the Demotic characters, what their suggested meanings are, and also verses within the Book of Mormon. So this is the very first time ever that anybody's been able to look at this Anthem transcript and decipher the fact that it is actually coming from the Book of Mormon in First Nephi, and it's relating to these passages in this area. So again, when he did his presentation, after he'd done his work, he invited John Gee, who is a professor of Egyptology at Eastern Languages at BYU, and he got his PhD in Egyptology at Yale University. He was invited to participate in the Zoom meeting that Brian Nettles did to show what he had been working on to identify that it was in First Nephi, that the dramatic characters, and that he was able to come up with some semblance of a translation. So this is the letter that John Gee gave back to Brian Nettles. Thank you for inviting me to your presentation. That was very kind. Thank you for allowing me to answer questions. I was not expecting to talk. It was your show, meaning you, Brian Nettles. Let me start by telling you some of the things in the presentation I think you got right. And so in essence, he's talking about what I got right, because I did the initial presentation of what you just saw today. It was very perceptive of you to recognize that the characters document is not necessarily the Anthem transcript. Even though I do not find your alternative explanations how it came to be persuasive, that was my explanation. I appreciate that you isolated the assumption and tried to argue consistently. Not everyone does that. So kudos to me if you want to say that. You appropriately realized that if the document is demotic, that it should be read from right to left. So that's correct. You put a great deal of work into your presentation. That is Brian Nettles. It was clear and easy to follow. That is a no mean feat. I was surprised and pleased by some of the comments that others provided. I found myself agreeing with many of them. So there you have it. So this is my understanding of when you look at that Anthem transcript, you can obviously say that it's not. It's coming from the small plates, and that John Whitmer somehow had access and was given the authority by Joseph Smith to record what he was seeing. And now I'm thankful that we have that record, because now we can look at those characters. There is a known demotic script group of people that are researching that. Brian Nettles is creating a database of those characters and what their meanings are. And methodically, he's going through and actually creating an interpretation of that Anthem transcript. So it is my testimony that the work that I'm doing and that Brian Nettles is doing and others have done is all supporting that Joseph Smith is translating an ancient record. And that ancient record has in it names that have known events that happened during, of course, Book of Mormon times, but have been validated by the Phoenician Expedition. And that all of these things are coming to light in our day is exciting to me and to others. And I bear witness to this, and I say it in Jesus Christ's name, amen. Okay, so now I'm done. So how do I get out of here now? Any questions? There we go.